Thrilled now to be joined by the Federalist.com's elections correspondent, Brianna Lyman. Brianna, thanks for coming back on the U.S. Report. So much to talk about, but I want to talk about the media. And there's a lot of fake news going around in the U.S. The Washington Post had a phenomenal piece with a phenomenal headline, and I'd love your reaction to this, reading, "The mysterious drop in fentanyl seizures on the U.S. Mexico border." I mean, Brianna, gosh, is someone going to tell them what happened here? Or are they just going to sort of just think that stuff happening on the southern border, well, that has nothing to do with who's in the White House?
This would be the equivalent of turning off the faucet and saying, I wonder why the water's not running anymore. The fact that the Washington Post is so oblivious to the obvious, and the obvious being that when Donald Trump took office, the first thing he did was shut the southern border down. He declared these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. He took every step he could in order to treat them the way they should have been treated under the Biden administration. So, of course, the flow of fentanyl will stop. And I think the real mystery here is, how does anyone at the Washington Post still have a job after writing something so embarrassingly dumb?
Well, you know, it reminds me, Brianna, of a famous headline in the New York Post about, the New York Times, about saying, well, you know, incarcerations keep rising, but somehow crime keeps falling. We don't know what's going on here. And, you know, it's a very typical sort of liberal newspaper sort of behavior. But I also want to move on to something else here that the Daily Caller revealed this week that tells us what's going on in America's classrooms. They found that the Head Start program, very popular government education program, apparently has been holding webinars for teachers on anti-bias and anti-racism strategies, warned teachers that babies could be racist, and even changed the lyrics of Old MacDonald Had a Farm to Old MacDonald had a farm, and on the farm, he, she, they had a pig, E-I-E-I-O. Brianna, and we wonder why Donald Trump wants to cut the Department of Education.
Yeah, there's so many things to say on this. First, on the Department of Education note, that is exactly the reason, right? First of all, our test scores, reading, math, all that has declined since the creation of the Department of Education in the 1970s, right? So this is just another example of where is the money actually being put towards. The second thing is, when people talk about DOGE and all the savings DOGE had, this is another example of wasteful federal spending. The last thing I'd say is that Democrats have yet to catch on for some reason that this divisive politics, right, this race-based rhetoric is not appealing to the average American, especially the American electorate that decides the president. So this is a type of policy decision that Democrats as a party should coalesce around and say, you know what, that's ridiculous. A baby can't be racist. Let's not, make up the most crazy things we can. Let's try to get back and ground ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, just sticking around this kind of intersection of media and culture, which is so fascinating, big win for the one and only Megyn Kelly, who's been a longtime critic of the Algerian boxer Imane Khalif, who she declared was a man even after winning gold in Paris. Well, now it's been revealed through a leaked medical report that the chromosome analysis makes her a male. It seems to me, Brianna, that Megyn Kelly is owed a massive apology from all of those people who really gave her a lot of noise over this one.
Absolutely. What Megyn Kelly did is state the obvious. Megyn Kelly used one of her 5 senses. She used her eyes, and she made a very obvious determination. And unfortunately, there is so much gaslighting coming from the left because they're into this gender-bending ideology that they try to smear and malign her. And as it turns out, like any good conspiracy theorist, you give it a few months, maybe a year, and it comes true, right? So Megyn Kelly is kind of experiencing that end of the cycle right there. But I think it's to a larger point. Americans and people in general need to stop worrying about the public backlash for stating something that is true and obvious. Otherwise, you create a society that is extremely weak and vulnerable to just someone with a big enough voice shutting them down, even if they're wrong.
Absolutely right. And as we all know, the left moves on those sorts of consensus politics where they try and shut down anybody who dissents. But I also want to talk too now, because I love going back to this guy who still has entertainment, even though he didn't win the election. Minnesota Governor Tim Waltz, who could have been vice president. Well, this week finally seemed to understand why young American men voted for Donald Trump. Although it wasn't Waltz who came to the realization, turned out it was his son. Have a look at this.
They're doing it because there's a sense of excitement, a sense of thrill in this. It's entertainment or whatever. We all dismiss that. Donald Trump's a clown. Donald Trump's rallies are a clown. And I think Donald Trump understands belonging, understand groups, but I don't think we went out to get them. We didn't out to make them feel a part of this.
The idea of a leader that is entertaining, appeals to young men, and makes them feel like they belong. Why is this rocket science to the left, or do they just want to keep saying, oh, you're men, you're bad, you're toxic?
You know, I actually think Tim Walz is still getting it wrong. Because when Donald Trump was going out and he's doing like this McDonald's stunt, these funny things, he was actively mocking the left. He wasn't just trying to entertain them, he was doing it to show how stupid the Democratic Party was. And people appreciated that type of authenticity and honesty. That's what Tim Walz doesn't seem to grasp. The other thing is Donald Trump isn't simply giving people red hats and, cool fun chants, which he has given us, don't get me wrong. But Donald Trump is giving a place in particular for young men to be. Because leading up to the election, a lot of first-time voters or people who had never voted Republican were telling places like USA Today, I want to put food on the table, I want a roof over my head, and I can't do that in this economy. Men were being emasculated by Democrat policy. So Donald Trump comes in and says, no, I'm going to create policies that allow you to lean into your masculinity. And until Democrats stop focusing on this hyper-obnoxious girl boss regime mentality, they will continue to create policies that do push men away. So it's about policy, not as much as Donald Trump just happened to be entertaining.
Brianna Lyman, we're going to have to leave it there. I think you might have gotten in trouble with the hashtag sisterhood for that girl boss comment, but I love it. Thank you so much for your sharp analysis as always and for joining me on the U.S. Report.